Lonely summer. California in the summer is like a scene from an indie movie. Endless blue skies, palm trees swaying in the breeze, and sunshine so abundant that even the blues take a back seat. But sometimes, even on a beautiful day, the human heart can feel empty. Daniel, 36, sits quietly by the pool of the villa he bought 3 years ago, a reward for years of hard work in the creative advertising industry. From the outside, his life seems perfect, a luxurious house on the outskirts of the city, a caring lover, and a steady job. But inside, Daniel is still learning to listen to himself, and perhaps relearning how to feel love. His girlfriend, Thomas, was in New York on a long business trip. They had lived together for nearly 5 years, sharing everything from their love of growing small cacti by the windows to their Saturday night cooking routine. They loved each other in a mature, peaceful way, but lately there had been a silence between them that neither dared to name. Maybe this is what I need, Daniel thought to himself as he leaned back on a bench by the lake. He closed his eyes, letting the sound of the water and the scent of lemongrass from the small garden next door soothe his racing thoughts. Loneliness is nothing new to Daniel. As a gay man entering middle age, he knows what it feels like to feel excluded, both in his younger years of hiding his identity and in relationships where he never truly belonged. Some nights, Daniel still thinks about the first person he ever loved, Matt, a college classmate who held his hand under the desk but avoided his gaze when leaving class. That first love ended in silence and left an emotional scar that Daniel carried with him for years. Then came a series of fleeting relationships, a wandering artist, a fitness trainer more obsessed with his muscles than Daniel's heart. I have loved so many people who need saving, he once told his therapist, when I'm the one who needs healing the most. Thomas, his current boyfriend, isn't like the others. He's kind, steady, and seemingly unwavering. But that sometimes leaves Daniel feeling lost. He craves a deep connection, a look that makes his heart flutter, someone who makes him feel seen completely, with all his hurt and unfulfilled hopes. It was a summer afternoon, the sunlight shining on the water, making it sparkle like crystal. Daniel stepped into the cool water, letting his body and mind sink into the feeling of lightness. Under the bright sun, at least here, he could temporarily stop being himself. Not someone's boyfriend, not the man who needed to be strong, not the gay man who had to live by a stereotype. Here, he was just Daniel. He closed his eyes, let himself float on the water, listened to the wind rustling through the trees, listened to his heart beat slowly. No deadlines, no work emails, no one to please. But deep inside, an uncertain feeling still lingered. Emptiness. Something was missing, something he couldn't name. Just as Daniel was floating in the water, he heard a car horn honking from the front gate. Someone had arrived. He hadn't made an appointment. A wave of unfamiliarity, anticipation, and unease washed over him, and he couldn't explain why. Maybe the universe is sending you something. A little push on your incomplete healing journey. The old friend returns. Daniel was pouring himself a glass of iced tea in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. A bolt of lightning from a calm sky. Not the delivery man. Not Thomas, who would be coming at noon in the summer. He stepped out to open the door, and the moment felt like a decade had passed. Jason. He stood there, smiling slightly, backpack in hand, hair slightly tousled in the wind, looking almost the same, but not quite. Jason spoke, his voice deeper than Daniel remembered, but still the kind of voice that could melt anyone's heart in crowded classrooms. Daniel was stunned for a few seconds, his chest feeling tight. Not because he didn't recognize Jason, but because he wasn't sure if he was dreaming or not. Jason? Daniel asked again, as if to confirm with himself. Yeah, surprise. A moment later, they hugged. Not a social hug, but a hug that carried the echoes of a youth that had never been spoken of. A gap that had never been filled. A question that had never been answered. What if? Jason said he was driving through California on a business trip. He remembered that Daniel lived nearby, so he stopped by. But Daniel knew Jason. He never stopped by without a reason. They sat in the living room, where sunlight streamed across the hardwood floors. Jason took off his light jacket, revealing a new tattoo on his arm. Nothing specific, just some Latin script. Daniel didn't ask, but he made a mental note. "Are you doing well?" Jason asked, his eyes soft but layered. Daniel nodded, trying to keep his voice even. "Good. You? 10 years. Yeah, 10 years, and not a single call from you." Jason half joked, half blamed. Daniel paused. "I thought, after that day, you didn't want to see me again." Jason was silent for a moment. "I've been waiting for you to call. Years. I thought you knew. In the LGBT community, there is a particularly heartbreaking kind of love. The friendship where both parties love each other, but neither dares to admit it. A deep connection stifled by fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of losing a friend. Fear of exposing yourself to a world that isn't ready for you." Jason and Daniel are just that type. They were once university classmates, studying the same major, eating lunch together, staying up late to study, watching movies together on weekend nights. But they were never in love. Although everyone had once thought, could it be? No one said out loud. Only the eyes and the accidental touches became a shared secret. Until one night, that night, they almost kissed. For a split second in the dark. But Daniel pulled back, afraid. And then there was silence. Jason transferred schools, and the distance became permanent. That evening, they sat on the porch, each holding a glass of white wine. Jason talked about his new job, a UX designer for a startup. Daniel talked about recent advertising campaigns. Small, but energetic stories from two people who were so close that they understood each other without saying a word. Finally, Jason put down his glass. "I didn't come here by accident. I came here because I needed closure." Daniel looked up, his fingers tightening around his glass. "About what?" "About us. About what could have been. Or at least, what needed to be said." Daniel was silent for a long time. "I wasn't brave back then," he said, his voice hoarse. "I thought if I did something wrong, I would lose you. And then I did." Jason chuckled. "I'm scared too. But I wish, at least once, you'd asked me, do you feel the same way?" Both were silent. Only the crickets chirped in the garden and the lavender scent from the hanging trellis drifted quietly by. Jason turned to look at Daniel. "That question, can I ask it now?" Daniel swallowed, his heart pounding. But he didn't ask. Not because he didn't want to, but because he wasn't sure he was ready to hear the answer. Unexpected invitation. "Can you stay for a few days? Just for a change of pace." Jason said it with a half smile, running a hand through his hair, his eyes glancing at Daniel. A look that was both innocent and probing. Daniel, leaning against the kitchen doorway, hesitated for a second before nodding. "Of course. The guest room is still available." Although his answer sounded gentle, there was a small shock inside. Daniel knew clearly. When an ex comes back not only to visit, but also to stay for a few days, nothing is accidental. That night, Jason left his bag in the living room and pulled out a faded t-shirt. He chuckled. "Remember this shirt? The one you borrowed from me and refused to return." Daniel laughed. "Damn, you still have it." Jason shrugged. "Yeah, because it smells like you." The words took Daniel by surprise for a second. There was something about the way Jason said it. Not flirtatious, but not just playful either. A touch of nostalgia. A touch of regret. A touch of hope. Over the next few days, the once silent house began to fill with sounds. Laughter in the kitchen, soft indie music from the living room speakers, the splashing of water as the two of them jumped into the pool. Jason had a way of making a space come alive, like he brought a breath of fresh air every time he entered the room. But at the same time, he also brought with him the smell of old things, a past that was still fresh in both of their memories. Daniel found himself staring at Jason more than he wanted to. Jason was a far cry from the awkward sophomore he had once been. He was poised, confident, and had a kind of charm that was hard to describe. No longer the recklessness of youth, but the gentle, delicate quality of someone who had been through a broken life. Jason emerged from the shower that night, hair still wet, wearing the t-shirt Daniel had given him. It was too big for him, but just enough for Daniel to see the curves of his shoulders, his chest stained with water, creating dark patches. "You still have these shirts?" Jason asked, pulling the hem up to wipe his neck. Daniel glanced away awkwardly. "Yeah, not much has changed." Jason stared at him, his eyes no longer innocent. They were the kind of eyes that knew what they were doing, that knew someone's heart had just skipped a beat. "I think something's changed," Jason said softly. That saying isn't just aimed at wardrobes. The second night, they sat on the porch, sipping craft beer and watching the stars. Jason talked about work, moving, relationships, and breakups. He mentioned his ex-boyfriend, a photographer who preferred freedom to stability. "I think he loves me, but only in beautiful frames. When life blurs, he disappears." Daniel nodded. "I once loved someone only when I didn't need anything from him." Jason chuckled. "It seems we fell in love with the wrong person, or the wrong time." They looked at each other, and in that moment, something very old returned, and yet something completely new. In that closeness, Daniel began to feel something strange. It wasn't just a flashback. It wasn't just the old Jason. It was the Jason of today, and the way he was quietly looking at him as if he wanted to ask something but couldn't quite put it into words. One time, Jason put his hand on Daniel's shoulder while they were grilling. His hand lingered there for a moment, not pulling away right away. Daniel didn't turn around, but his heart pounded as if someone had knocked on the door. Dangerous intimacy. That afternoon, the California sky seemed to pause at a perfect moment. The sun was not too harsh. The wind was just enough to make the trees in the backyard rustle softly like a whisper. The pool water was a deep blue, reflecting the sky like a stretched canvas, and in that stillness, everything seemed to slow down, just so something important could happen. Jason was sprawled out on a sun lounger, sunglasses on, a thin white t-shirt clinging to his body with sweat. Daniel glanced at him from behind the kitchen door, a quick, habitual glance, but this time it wasn't unconscious. Jason asked as Daniel walked out into the backyard with 2 cans of cool water. His voice was soft, but his eyes behind his sunglasses were intent. Without waiting for an answer, Jason stood up, pulled his shirt off, and dove into the pool in one clean dive. The splash seemed to awaken a dormant current in Daniel. "Come on, the water's perfect," Jason called out, his voice playful, but also something of an invitation that went beyond the literal. Daniel hesitated for a few seconds before stepping in, the cool water embracing his body like a reverse winter blanket. But it was Jason's eyes that made his skin crawl, not because of the cold, but because it said something neither of them dared to say. They stood by the edge of the pool, their hands resting on the cool stone, shoulder to shoulder, their quiet breathing mingling with the sound of the water. Jason blurted out the question as if it were an accident, but Daniel knew it was a question meant for him. "I think I have felt that way." "Many times," Daniel replied slowly. Jason turned to look at him, their breaths touching now. "And now what?" Daniel was silent, because he didn't know. Or rather, he knew, but didn't dare admit it. Jason reached for a leaf clinging to Daniel's hair. His hand brushed against his ear, more gently than necessary. His fingers paused for a beat before withdrawing. The leaves fell in the right place. Jason laughed, half joking. Daniel smiled wryly, then turned away. His heart was pounding, not because he was afraid Jason would do something wrong, but because he knew he wouldn't stop if he did. That touch, that look, that smile, everything was going beyond the limits of old friends. Daniel is someone who has avoided love, not because he doesn't believe in love, but because too many times he's been the one to heal others, but no one has the patience to wait for him to open up. He once loved another old friend, but that person chose to settle down with someone else, only to tell Daniel, "You make me feel too much." From then on, he learned to withdraw, turning emotions into a luxury, rather than love, then once again be the one who feels too much. Jason didn't shy away from emotions. He always looked straight at the problem, and Daniel knew that today's look, that touch, that accidental closeness, was no accident. "You know," Jason said as they lay back on the sun lounger, towels covering half of their bodies, "I always thought you were avoiding me, but now I realize you were probably avoiding yourself." Daniel turned, his eyes defensive. "What do you mean?" Jason shrugged, half joking. "It's just a feeling. I used to be like that too, until I stopped being afraid." Daniel sat up, his heart breaking at the words. He felt seen through, as if all the defenses he had built up over the past 10 years had been torn down by a single look, a single word, a single innocent touch. "I don't know what I'm doing," Daniel muttered. Jason just smiled, soft but unwavering. "I know better than you think." No one said anything more, but the silence wasn't empty. It was full of emotion, full of expectation, full of danger. The longest night. The house was bathed in the soft yellow glow of string lights strung around the porch. The smell of grilled wood still hung in the air, mixed with the scent of lavender and soft jazz playing from a Bluetooth speaker. The small cocktail party started out as a relaxing affair. 2 people, a few glasses of white wine, some snacks, and the laughter of old stories. But as time went on, and with every drop of wine, the mood changed. From light to whispering. From old friends to something different, deeper, hotter, and more dangerous. "Remember that time I got drunk after graduation?" Jason chuckled, raising his glass. Daniel nodded. "I called your name in my sleep." Jason looked at him for a long moment. Then, as if he couldn't hold it in any longer, he put down his glass. His voice was low, unusually serious. "I have never forgotten you." Daniel was stunned. Those words were like an arrow piercing through the shell he had spent 10 years building. "Actually," Jason continued, "everyone thinks my first love was that photographer. But no, it was you. It was always you." Daniel turned away, trying to hide his trembling, limp face. His chest felt like someone was squeezing every breath. "Jason, don't what? Don't make this complicated." Jason stood up and walked in front of Daniel. No pressure, no calculation, just naked honesty. "It's never simple, Dan," Jason whispered. "And I think you know that." Daniel took a step back, but stood still. He felt like he was caught between 2 fronts. On one side is reason. He's too young. "I have a boyfriend. This is a mistake." One side is the heart. "I loved him from the first day, and never stopped." He used to think that time could kill emotions. But now, standing before Jason, the man he had dreamed about many nights but never dared to keep, he realized, it's not time that makes us forget, but we learn to live with the absence. Jason didn't touch Daniel right away. He just stood close enough that their breaths mingled. The look in his eyes wasn't that of someone who wanted, it was that of someone who had been waiting for a long time. "Do you ever think about me, even once?" Jason asked. Daniel looked into his eyes. A small spark in the depths of them, quiet, aching, sincere, almost took his breath away. And then he said nothing. Just moved back, closer, so close that all distances disappear. And they kissed. No rush, no rush, not because of physical desire. But one quiet night, both grown men finally admitted that they never stopped loving each other. They were just good at hiding it. That kiss was not the beginning, but the end of a series of hidden days. Jason wrapped his arms around Daniel's neck, gently, as if afraid he would disappear. Daniel, for the first time in years, didn't hide. Didn't avoid eye contact. There was only one thing that remained. The feeling of "I'm finally home." When their lips parted, Daniel gasped, his eyes bewildered. "We shouldn't be doing this," he said, but the words lost their weight. Jason nodded. "I know, but if I don't say it today, I'll never forgive myself." Silence. The next morning, the house was filled with a strange silence. Not the peaceful silence of Jason's first days, but the silence of those who have touched the untouchable and don't know what to do next. Daniel woke up early, a reflex when his mind was in turmoil. He made coffee, his hands shaking as he poured the milk. His heartbeat was still uneven from the night before, a night in which he had not slept at all. Not because of the kiss, but because of everything that came with it. The emotions, the memories, the truth, and the guilt. Jason still hasn't come out of the room. Or maybe he woke up earlier, but chose not to go through the kitchen. Daniel sat down at the dining table, staring at his coffee, without drinking. Only a door apart, but the distance between them had never felt so far. Daniel loved Thomas. He knew that. Thomas was a good person who had been there for him through his darkest times, when his job had failed, when his mother had died, when Daniel had doubted his own worth. Thomas wasn't the one who made his heart race, but he was the one he wanted to come home to at night. And last night, you betrayed that trust. No need to go to bed. No need to cross physical boundaries. Just a kiss. And in that kiss were all the feelings he had hidden deep inside for someone who was not his life partner. Daniel felt terrible, not because of Jason, but because of himself. The person who thought he had overcome the past turned out to be still being held back by it with just a look. In the guest bedroom, Jason lay on his side, eyes open, staring out the window. He couldn't sleep. He didn't cry, but his heart felt like it was constricting in his chest, a feeling he'd had at 21 when Daniel disappeared after his last night of college. Am I going to ruin it all again? Jason whispered to himself. He didn't regret the kiss, but he was afraid. Afraid that it would make Daniel afraid of him. Afraid that what they had rebuilt in the past few days would collapse forever. They didn't see each other all morning. Jason ducked out on a back lawn, pretending to make a phone call. Daniel rushed to clean up, wiping down what was clean. No one had the courage to say anything. And in the LGBT community, this silence is frighteningly familiar. When two gay people cross the line between friends and maybe more, but then no one dares to define it, for fear of losing both, love and friendship. Late that afternoon, Jason walked into the kitchen to get some water. Daniel had just come out of the bathroom. They stopped. Meet eyes. They both opened their mouths to say something, but then fell silent. Jason smiled slightly, nodded, and backed out into the yard. Daniel clenched his fists, stood still, eyes downcast. 1,000 words to say, and not a single word spoken. Memories and choices. That night, Daniel did not sleep. He lay on the bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, the street lights shining through the curtains creating blurry streaks of light on the ceiling, like fragments of memories passing by him, piece by piece, beat by beat. Part of him wanted to sleep, to forget everything. But another part of him knew there was no more running away. That year, Daniel was 23 years old, a senior, smart, handsome, but lived a much quieter life than he appeared. He studied well, knew how to blend in, but just blended in enough to not be noticed. Jason is a freshman, bright, bubbly, carefree, and oh so attractive. From the first time he met Jason in the library, Daniel felt something. Not sex, not a high school crush, but a very deep feeling. The feeling that this was the first person he wanted to stop and love. But that was when Daniel understood clearly. If I reveal that, I will lose everything. College in 2009 was not a safe place for an openly gay man, especially in a field that was still full of prejudice. Daniel witnessed a classmate being ostracized because of a rumor that he was gay. He was used to living a double life. One side to survive, one side to love in silence. And so, every time Jason laughed, every time Jason fell asleep on his shoulder in the library, or when Jason held his hand in the dark at a movie night, Daniel said nothing. Silence. Always silence. That evening, as they sat together on the porch, Jason finally spoke. His voice was not reproachful, just regretful. I waited for you. Many times. I thought if I was patient, one day you would have the courage to say something. But then you disappeared. Without a word. Daniel clenched his teacup. His throat tightened. I was scared. Scared that if I spoke out, everything would be gone. The friendship, the safety, the person I was trying to be. Jason looked at him, eyes slightly red. But don't you see that silence is also a way to make things disappear? They sat there in silence. The air was thick between two men who had loved each other, had missed each other, and now sat next to each other, once again at crossroads. Daniel sighed. I never stopped thinking about you. Jason chuckled, as if hearing that 10 years too late. So what this time? Jason asked, will you choose silence or me? Daniel did not answer immediately. Not that he didn't know the answer, but for the first time in his life, he was wondering if he had to choose between living by the standards and living true to his heart, which would be braver. Before ending the evening, Daniel said slowly, tomorrow, I don't want to wake up and run away again. You deserve to know the truth. I owe it to you and to myself. Jason nodded, saying nothing. He simply held Daniel's hand for a moment. The hold wasn't possessive, but to say, this time I'm still here, but I won't wait forever. The fateful conversation. The sunset that day came like an old friend, not rushed, not bustling, just silently pouring streaks of orange, amber, and a touch of sad purple into the sky. The atmosphere in the backyard was light, as if the universe was also waiting silently for something to happen. Daniel and Jason sat on the wooden bench on the front porch. 2 cups of herbal tea cooled in their hands, neither sipping. No preamble needed. They both knew this was no ordinary afternoon. This was a moment of courage. A moment like this, only a few times in a lifetime. Jason was the first to speak. His voice was soft, not accusatory, not demanding. But there was something about the way he looked straight into Daniel's eyes that made the other man's heart slow. If you had the chance now, would you choose me? That question, seemingly simple, is as heavy as a decade of missed memories, like every lonely night, every hidden desire, every time we looked at each other but didn't dare to hold back. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked out at the horizon, where the sun was setting behind the trees, a metaphor for the opportunity that would pass if not seized. "I loved you," Daniel said softly, his eyes still fixed on the sunset. There was a pause. Then he turned back to Jason, his eyes wet, not with tears, but with years of trying to harden his heart. "And the truth is, I never stopped loving you." Jason paused, as if that answer was both everything he'd expected and also the thing that broke his heart. Daniel swallowed. His voice was confessional. "I'm afraid of happiness." It sounds absurd, right? But I am, because everything I've lost came after I started hoping. He talks about his first love, betrayed after coming out, about his parents, never really accepting him for who he is, about how every time he feels true happiness, something always happens to snatch it away from him. I learned to live with stability, live safely, with Thomas, with work, with loneliness disguised as routine. And then you came along and made me see the things I try to forget as real. Jason didn't interrupt. He let Daniel finish. Then he gently placed his hand on Daniel's. "I don't need you to promise me anything. I just want to know, if you step out of your fear, will the first person you go to be me?" Daniel looked at him. His eyes were filled with things he had never dared to say out loud. "It's you," he whispered. "It's always you." Jason chuckled, like someone who had just breathed again after years underwater. There was no background music in that moment, no declaration, no flowery love words, just 2 men sitting in the fading sunset, holding hands, not for any certain reason, but because for the first time, they didn't need to hide anymore. Overcoming fear. The day Jason left, it wasn't raining. There was no thunder, no gray skies. Just a normal morning, but to Daniel, everything seemed to fall apart in silence. Jason didn't make a fuss. He didn't argue. He didn't demand promises. He just packed, neatly and quietly, like someone who had learned to leave when he felt unwanted. When Daniel entered the living room, Jason was already zipping up his backpack. He turned back, his eyes not angry, but sad in a very grown-up way. "I don't want to be the one to make you fight with yourself. If you're not ready, I won't stay and wait." Daniel said nothing. He stood there frozen. Jason walked past him, but stopped at the door. "I waited for you for 10 years. This time, I choose to wait for myself." Jason is gone. There is only the faint scent of perfume in the air, the dents in the pillows, and the loud, uncomfortable absence. The house suddenly felt larger, but not in a pleasant way, in a way that made one feel small and frightened. Daniel tried to work. Didn't work. Tried to call Thomas, but didn't know what to say. Tried to fill his mind with music, books, cleaning, but nothing could fill the feeling of losing the most important thing in his life again. Daniel sat on the bedroom floor, staring blankly out into the backyard, where Jason used to make coffee every morning. He missed the innocent jokes, the gentle touch, the sad smile at dusk. Then he asked himself, if I let him go again this time, will I be able to live with that? Don't live with nostalgia. Live with your own cowardice. 10 minutes later, Daniel was in the car. No need to think. No calls. No prepared words. Only one line echoed in his head, like a primitive instinct. I have to keep him. I have to. Daniel ran through the security gate, panting and looking around. His eyes scanned the crowd. A man in a black hoodie? No. A college kid with a backpack? No. Then he saw Jason, standing at the check-in counter, back turned. For a brief moment, the world stopped spinning. "Jason," Daniel called out, his voice echoing through the crowded space. Jason turned, his eyes widened, surprised and hurt. "What are you doing here?" Daniel walked forward, ignoring the gazes around him. "I'm scared. I've always been scared. But the bigger fear is losing you." Jason was silent. Daniel continued, "I don't know where this is going. I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing. But I do know one thing. If I don't try to keep you this time, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Another silence. Jason pursed his lips as if holding something close to his heart, then sighed softly. "Then say it again. But this time, look me in the eyes and say it." Daniel looked straight at him. "I choose you." Jason closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, they were wet, but tears of recognition, no longer of expectation. He nodded. There was no cinematic hug, no passionate kiss in the middle of a crowd. Just two men standing in the middle of the airport, holding hands and finally walking in the same direction. Graduation Cap Analysis and Message Part 9. LGBT Expert Perspective. The fear of happiness is a real specter in the lives of many LGBT adults, especially those who grew up in a time of unacceptance. They learn to trade their true feelings for safety. Jason left not because he fell out of love, but because he learned to love himself first, a brave step forward in queer love. The act of running after him at the airport is a symbolic image of the decision to overcome the fear of being real. Even if it may not be perfect, at least it is honest. Love in the LGBT community doesn't need loud demonstrations. It needs consistency between what we feel and what we dare do. Rebirth. The airport was busier now. People were coming and going. Takeoff announcements were coming and going over the loudspeakers. But for Daniel and Jason, the world was reduced to just the two of them, and a decision had just been made with trepidation and sincerity. Daniel still held Jason's hand, not backing away. His eyes were red, not because of pain, but because for the first time, he let his heart speak without asking anyone's permission. You've lived half your life for other people, for expectations, for fear, for trying not to mess up anyone's life. But you've never really asked, "What do you want?" He squeezed Jason's hand gently, then continued, "And now, I choose to live authentically, not for society, not for anyone else, for myself. And if living authentically means keeping you, then I'm ready." Jason didn't respond. He just walked over and put his arms around Daniel, in the middle of the airport, amid the chatter of passengers and the rustle of suitcases being dragged. It wasn't a cinematic slow-motion hug. It was awkward, a little hesitant, but it is true. It was an embrace of two people who had strayed from each other, who had missed each other, who had chosen silence, and now finally chose each other. They went back to Daniel's house that day. Not much talking, not a plan. No one talked about what will happen to Thomas or whether it will last. Because the truth is, love doesn't need to be planned or timed or with the right person. It just needs to be chosen. Every day, with courage, Daniel begins to rewrite parts of his life that he once let others control. Jason began to learn not to apologize for his feelings. The house was unchanged, but this time there was laughter every morning, soft music playing in the kitchen, and two coffee mugs always placed a little closer together on the table. No grand declarations of love. No lavish weddings. No official social media. Just two people choosing to hold hands every day. Not because they were certain it would be forever, but because they had learned not to let fear take away another chance. Love doesn't come from being at the right time or with the right person. It comes from having the courage to hold on. Thank you for following Daniel and Jason's story. I hope you find a piece of your heart in every little part. If this story touches you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. Have you ever been silent when you should have said something? See you in other healing love stories, only on our channel.